Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Moxtober daily recap. If you don't know what Moxtober is, it's an annual event where for each day of the month of October, there's a different one word prompt, and based on that prompt, people do various creative endeavors related to the game of Magic the Gathering. Most people design custom cards, which is what we review in these daily recaps. People also draw art, write articles, and make deck lists. Really, anything creative related to the hobby. If you want to see the full designer credits for all the cards we talk about today, as well as the files that we pull all of these cards from, and instructions on how you can submit your own cards to be potentially included in future episodes, you can find that all in the description. Now, today's word is ritual, and I'm joined by Ancestral of MTG.design and Mark Confidant from the Beacon of Creation community. Let's get into it. So my first card is going to be, I think, my favorite card of the day. I usually save these for a little bit in, but this one uh, is just like, I'm kind of just raring to talk about it. So it's Every Day is the Same from the MSC file. White and a black for an enchantment. And when it enters the battlefield, you name a creature card, and creatures with the chosen name are 1/1 white workers with no abilities. It's interesting because this does some interesting things. I think this could also honestly be blue-white, because blue is more known for these frogify effects. But on a board where you have like one creature, it's like, okay, whatever. You've frogified something. But you can also do the what is Declaration in Stone type thing, where it functions as a mini wipe with creatures with the same name and just turning them into small things. And I love the idea of like ritual here, meaning like the daily cycle of like going to work and whatever. There's been a lot of like ink spilled over kind of uh, the work pattern slash habits in like corporate culture, and I think that this is kind of an interesting way of like conceptualizing that in magic. There's also sort of like a future dystopian thing where it's like precognitive algorithms trace potential rebellion leaders, which are then given stable and lucrative employment. Very like cyberpunk or like otherwise tech dystopia there. But yeah, overall, this just felt like a cool card with cool flavor that suggests a lot about its setting and that also has interesting function as a removal spell.
One of the things that's always interesting to me about this style of removal is that it's incapable of interacting with tokens. So you have this sort of like spottiness to the removal that isn't necessarily bad, where it's like if your opponent is playing a bunch of like Thrag Tusks, sure you can answer the Thrag Tusks, but you can't answer the beasts that are left behind, for example. Um, so you end up with this like pressure on you to find other ways to deal with the tokens, which obviously isn't necessarily the most difficult thing, but it does create like a little gap, like a chink in your armor when it comes to treating this as just straight up removal.
Yeah, it looks like a sideboard card. I mean, against the right deck, this can really shut stuff down. If opponent is playing multiples of a card. Um, but yeah, otherwise it seems fine. I really like the flavor too. I think that the the idea that everyone is dressed the same way and going to work at the same place, and what differentiates one day from another day, just sort of being a cog in a machine. So I think this captures that very accurately.
Uh, okay, two notes just that might be a little bit fiddly templating stuff and just me being neurotic. One of which is I kind of wish this stripped away types as well, so the creatures are just workers; they lose all other identity. And then the other one is okay, actually it might work like that. I forget because I think becoming workers, it lacking the in addition to its other types does strip away types. So scratch that. And the other one is maybe having it be in all zones. So like for example, some random like dredge creature that can recur from the graveyard. If this is out there and you name that, then it loses the graveyard ability that would allow it to be recurred to the graveyard or recurred from the graveyard. Even if it would only be like recurring as a 1/1, it's still somewhat relevant.
Am I what's the word? Not wrong, but I guess am I mistaken if I want this to say assembly worker instead of workers.
I kind of like that. It's very authentic Magic flavor.
Yeah, and like that works as is I think would work is worker a new type? I know that assembly worker isn't, but I think worker might be.
I think worker would be a new type, where assembly worker is a hyphenate and therefore is one type rather than being weird the way like Urza's Tower is both an Urza's and a tower because it turns out any space in subtype
I
names
I feel
makes
like it would
sense.
also like synergize with some of the other like assembly worker cards where you know like the assembly hyphen worker artifact creature that targets an assembly worker creature and it gets +1/+1. It's sort of you're rewarded for having more of these.
Yeah, and it's weird because I think that's like kind of an artifact centric niche,
Mhm.
but I like the idea that like the assembly workers are nobodies to the point where they almost seem like automatons.
Okay. Yeah, I think those are all just like good suggestions for the flavor, and also like, I like the mechanical significance of that. I don't have much to add. So, Mark, what is your first card of the day?
All right. Also in the MSC files, there is a card that is Ritual of Honey, designed by MBTree. You gain 3 life, return up to 2 target creature cards with total mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, where X is the amount of life you gained this turn. And it's a black sorcery. I just like this as I feel like it's evoking something that I don't specifically know because there's a different Ritual of Honey card in the MTG.design files. I like this as a life gain payoff though. It's like a does it fair on its own, but then also you can like, have something with lots of moving pieces where you sacrifice like a soul ward and gain a bunch of life in one turn and then recur like your Gristlebrand or something like that. I honestly feel like maybe this could be a little bit cheaper, like one black black, or it could be hybrid or things like that. This is evocative of it referencing something that I don't know, and I didn't Google it before the show just because I didn't want to spoil myself. If that's kind of weird, but and I think the rate on this is like safe, but could be pushed a little bit further without getting into too much trouble.
That's really interesting because I thought this was a little bit too effective. I mean, the idea paying 4 mana to reanimate 2 creatures that are mana value 3 or less, and if you already gained a little bit of life, maybe more. I think honestly, for 4 mana, that's actually really aggressive.
So it's total mana value though, so it's like a 1 drop and a 2 drop or something, or like a 3 drop and a
Oh,
Dryad.
it's total mana value. I misread that. Okay, so this is very similar to the card from Ikoria, that
With the
where you
death
put
touch counter or something.
yeah,
Back for
yeah.
more?
That
No,
sounds
not
right.
back for more, but it's the yeah, it's like the total mana value 3 or less.
Got like a weird bug looking
Oh,
thing on
like
it.
Call of the Death Dweller. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's I think it.
Yeah, I think this
this
this was this
definitely
is
has this.
originally 5 mana if I remember the discussions right, and I think that like this slight pushing of it makes it more interesting because it allows you to also like synergize with it in little ways, um, like with Soul Sisters or just like because life gain is one of those things which I love because unless you're versus a very aggressive deck, it's kind of a meaningless resource, and so there's a lot of ways to like turn it into something that's like powerful and relevant, and I think that's kind of a cool thing to do. And I also like seeing it in black, where it's like it feels like it makes sense for this type of black life gain to exist because it's sort of like black. I feel like just like using stuff as resources or like manipulating stuff feels like a very black concept. Even though I could see this in white, I think that it makes a lot of sense to like frame it that way.
I definitely think this could be a hybrid card, but like could and has to be are a pretty wide gap in my opinion. I'd mostly like it to be a hybrid card so I could jam it into white decks. So I could have like white life gain that was doing like white's quote unquote small creature reanimation, but then kind of using life gain to a little bit scribble out the word small there.
Okay. Next up, ancestral. What is your first card going to be?
Well, we'll go with Tutoring Ritual, which is on mtg.design. It's a single black mana sorcery. It has an additional cost to cast the spell. Pay X life. Search your library for a card with mana value X or less and exile it. You may play that card this turn. So obviously this is like a tutor, except instead of paying 3, 4, 5 mana for for delving for seeking a card, you're paying life, which evokes the whole ritual aspect, where at least the classical trope of the calling for performing a ceremony to summon a bigger thing. So the flavor is certainly there. The downside is you only get it for a turn, which maybe offsets the cost. The cheaper cost, obviously you have to pay life. So if you are summoning literally summoning, if you're getting a creature that say is mana value 5 or 6, it's going to cost 5 or 6 life. And mid game, late game, that could become an issue, or it could become a game saver.
I'm going to be real. I think the design of this is potentially compelling, even though it's very strong. I just was like, I saw this and I'm like, for real? You're going to give me this name? Like, it feels like so on the nose,
Right.
but also so wrong. It's like, I'm like, this isn't a ritual. It doesn't give you mana. And like, it should be like at least like ritual of tutoring. Even if that's more clunky, I would have preferred that formatting. But yeah, outside of the name, I think that it's odd because I think that evaluating this card is kind of hard because like usually what happens with tutors is that you trade tempo for card quality, right? So usually like with let's say like demonic tutor or something, you're giving up a turn 2 play to be able to essentially draw any card in your deck. Here, you don't actually get that like tempo benefit, um, or tempo not benefit, tempo negative, because uh, like you're getting to cast it the same turn, but it will cost like one more and a bunch of life. So it feels like it inverts kind of the standard thing of tutors, which is the ability to like draw whatever card and then curve into playing it and then comboing out or whatever. Um, Having to play this turn is definitely a downside. I do think that like getting any card in your deck for essentially, I think paying life is not a huge biggie, um, and I think that like in formats where lots of the spells are cheap, this being like 2 mana, like obviously like those formats are already broken, but like let's say in the hyperbolic case, 2 mana ancestral recall, or even in like a standard format, like using this to be able to grab something which otherwise gains life and can mitigate that part of the downside. I think that I don't know how I would balance this. I probably just tack like 1 or 2 mana onto this, but I think the overall concept of like towing the line is pretty compelling. I rambled a lot there for essentially saying two things, but yeah.
No, I think you're spot on. I feel like 1 or 2 mana is really necessary on this to play up like the tension of only getting the card for a turn. So like the thing about tutors in general is that as a format gets wider, they become more problematic because the idea of like what is your best card in a given situation becomes like a much wider theta. Where like in a standard set, maybe you have like sideboard cards you can tutor into, and those are pretty good in games 2 and 3. But like the difference between like your ideal on curve play and like the thing you can tutor up and play instead is not like this wild gap. It's just like probably a little bit better, maybe with some like toolboxy effects where it's like I know that I can answer this one really problematic thing with this one of that I'd be sad to draw, but I can just tutor into. Um, for this, like paying 1 mana more and some life for it, in standard it would probably be like a pretty big gap because you'd have like, a 5-drop spell that you really don't want to pay 5 life for or something like that. So like what's the thing that you can tutor up that is like the thing you are most willing to tolerate tutoring up? In a wider format, it's either like what's the perfect card to cast this turn? Okay, I'll cast that, but it costs 1 more mana and some life. Oh well. Like that's not the most backbreaking thing as far as stuff goes. Because like, on turn 3, tutoring up Lightning Helix, getting Lightning Helix with this, gaining 1 and removing a thing. It's like fine. Obviously it's Mardu colors, but still. And then when you get into even wider formats, you'll have something where it's like, okay, I have a 2-card combo in my deck. I can tutor for one of the pieces for it, or I can tutor for protection, or I can tutor for this sideboard card that blows out my opponent's game plan that I have like a one of main because my opponent's game plan is a broad enough and common enough thing that I can just casually like maintain a sideboard card in the main for it.
Yeah, I mean,
So
like Thassa's Oracle is like a problem in and of itself, but imagine like weren't there like consultation decks in Historic where they deliberately took the L on playing a singleton deck just to enable consultation into Thassa stuff? Like I can
Yep, that was
imagine
a thing.
I can imagine like similar stuff happening where it's like Tutoring Ritual being like very cheap, um, and also like enabling like other cheap combo pieces like what do you call it? Like Thassa's Oracle to do dumb stuff. I could definitely see that being a 2-card combo extraordinaire.
yeah, you go for like turbo depths where this is your crop rotation, except you also have the ability to like casually pull up like a Thought Seize, or there's got to be something
Oh
that gives your
wait,
land shroud or
that is
something.
filthy because you can just pay
Um,
0 for lands.
That's what
Yep.
I was gonna say. If I was gonna tweak something, that would be it because all of a sudden this lets you tutor for a land. So I think
Maybe like a
the
fixed
tweak,
cost, like maybe just like a fixed thing of like 4 or 5.
or
I may only say
maybe
that because like you can also I feel like being able to pay a bunch of life into this can also
I mean
be a
there
dumb combo. Like obviously there's a bunch of stuff that allows you to do that, but I think that like having like and this is kind of a meme, but like having a way to like cheekily pay a bunch of life into this for like a Death Shadow swing is an
Yeah.
where it's already like a pretty fine fair card, quote unquote. I think is definitely a potentially scary use case. Though I definitely
the
could be overvaluing. I think like there's definitely a thing with
yeah.
Death Shadow where it's like sorry, I've been cutting you off. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say it. Diabolic Tutor is 4 mana. It's kind of your traditional uncommon. You can get a card. Period. We've seen it reprinted before, but not recently. But we've had it before, and so black can get a land. You could pay 4 mana and then put a land into play, but yeah, for 1 mana that does seem a little too good. So I think I'm just with you. I think it. I don't know. Maybe it needs to be. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how I would fix this. Maybe it's adding an extra mana, but I do like that the larger the card, the more life it costs. Um, it's definitely rare mythic. Like, there's no question about that.
Hmm. I'm tempted to compare to like Grim Tutor, which is that's the one that's one black black. You tutor something up and you lose 3 life, and that was in
Oh, good
play.
point.
That was legal for standard and didn't really do anything. Um, and obviously like there's a little bit of an asterisk in that like as mentioned, standard is the format where tutors are the weakest, and so I could easily see this being something kind of like the Eldrazi were in Oath, where it's just like whoopsies blow up older formats, but not really matter in standard.
Yeah, I think that that's a pretty fair estimation, especially since like we mentioned earlier, cheaper spells Like the older you go, the more cheaper spells tend to roll a day. Um,
Yeah, and the more you can converge on just like having like really big rate mistakes or really like narrow casting like a toolbox.
okay, now gonna move on since we spent like 10 minutes on that card.
Sorry
Um,
about that.
no, not inherently a problem, but I do want to like make sure that we get to a bunch more. Um, so I think the next one I want to feature is maybe our first like actual factual ritual of the day, um, which is going to be Repurpose from the MSC file. So let's go over here. And it's essentially red as an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice an artifact, add red, red, red. And I think this is probably a card that could do very busted things. All rituals are. Um, but I like the core concept of this of like, okay, this can be a dark ritual, but you need to have some sort of resource to put into this. You need to have some artifacts, and unless we're playing in like Mirrodin or whatever, you're not going to have like artifact lands. And if you have free artifacts in the same environment as this, that's definitely going to be a mistake. So don't do that either. But outside of that, I think that like having this thing of like tension of like, okay, I need to make like a turn one or turn two play, and then I can use this to like ramp up into something, maybe like an Eggsy deck that also wants to like generate a bunch of mana and storm off. Um, and I love the flavor here for ritual because it's like the idea of like the old is constantly flowing into the new and the new takes parts of the old and transforms it, and there's sort of like a symbiotic relationship there, which is shown in the flavor text. But I like that idea of like taking the thing of a ritual, which is usually seen in like kind of a micro context, and moving it to the macro level of like, yeah, the ritual of generations.
Yeah, I think this is definitely one of those cards that like creates a meaningful burden on you. Like there's a red one of these that sees play in Pauper where you can sacrifice an artifact to make 3 goblins. Um and the challenge is like doing that in a way where you aren't blown out, and you have to do something like play a what is it, the artifacts that chromatic star, I want to say, or sphere, one of the two, I always get them mixed up, or a there's a lot of 2 mana artifacts that when they come in draw you a card, so you can also play any one of those, and then you just like throw it in the garbage in order to do this at like a not terribly card disadvantageous way. You probably would want to be doing this like storming off, just because ramping up mana for a fair creature in constructed usually is a little bit dangerous. But I'd like to see if it'd be possible to have like a creature that would be worth dark ritualing into the way Hypnotic Spectre was way back in the day. I wonder what that sort of deck looks like.
Yeah, I think this is a fairly costed card. There's there are very similar cards like Infernal Plunge, which is instead of sacrificing an artifact, you sacrifice a creature, and that was a common in Innistrad. And then of course we had cards like Poetic Ritual, which was in standard at one point, which is 2 mana, instant add 3. So this is a 1 mana sorcery, sack an artifact, add 3. It might be a little bit stronger in the current standard. In fact, the current last few standards, because we've had treasure tokens and gold tokens. So the effect might be a little bit easier to handle these days, um, but I think it's probably fine, and uh, it's very red. I guess I don't have anything else to add.
Treasure and gold is a good note though, or like treasure, gold, food, and clues,
Mm-hmm.
because you can get those kind of incidentally, but like it's sort of a little bit card disadvantageous to melt down a clue, and it's also sort of making this a 2 mana ritual when you melt down a treasure. So it's interesting.
Okay, so yeah, shout out to Provocative. And what's your next card, Mark?
Let's see here. I like Ritual of Reawakening quite a bit. It's a reanimation spell. It's in the mtg.design file. It's 1 and a black. Exile target creature card from your graveyard and put 3 time counters on it. If it doesn't have suspend, it gains suspend. So it's essentially like a variant on the kind of macro cycle they've been doing of suspend versions of different classic mana spells, like classic busted rate spells, channel or ancestral recall or living death or things like that. Except in this case, it's a reanimation spell that the spell is at the ordinary speed, but gives suspend to the creature. So rather than it being like eventually you will be reanimating a thing, and you can set up the creature in the meantime, you have to reanimate the creature now, and then eventually the creature will come down.
Yeah, and I love this as like a variant on like traditional 2 mana reanimation like Goryo's Vengeance or whatever, where or like Exhume or whatever, where like this feels like explosive reanimation, but there's a real cost of like you can't top deck it because if you top deck in the late game, it isn't useful because they still have like 3 turns to like bonk you. And even if you're playing it on curve, you don't get your creature till turn 5. Um, which obviously getting the tempo advantage of being able to play a turn 2 um, under like potential counter magic or like discard or whatever, definitely a bonus. So like standard, this might be a little too good compared to like because we haven't even gotten like zombify style reanimation recently, if in standard, if mind serves. Um, but yeah, I like the overall play pattern of this. It feels like a very powerful yet very fair effect, which is a hard balance to strike.
It's also the subtle knob of because it's suspend, you getting under counter magic with the reanimation spell doesn't get you under counter magic for the actual
Oh
creature
yeah, because it's
spell
actually
itself.
cast. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like a maybe not broken way to do this. You uh, have to wait, what, 2 or 3 turns before it comes online?
Yeah, the creature comes online on the 3rd turn. So and it has haste, so
Mhm.
it actually does get to be like a beater pretty quickly. And that your
Yeah.
ideal case is having whatever busted thing you put in the bin come down on turn 5. But
Mhm.
that's a little bit reliant on you managing to get it discarded on turn 1, which is kind of a big ask for like standard.
Right. Yeah. No, yeah, I think I like it. I like it more than I did the first time I read the card. So, it yeah, I guess it seems fair. Um, all I need is more time. Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, and shout out to CyberFive. Also, particularly because I feel like they've been on a streak of designing fun cards. So kudos to that. Okay, Ancestral, what is your next card going to be?
Hmm. Well, uh, let's see here. Um, I just had the card here. Um, few of these were. All right, we'll go with this one. I think. Oh no, no, I don't want to do that one. Let's go with this one here. Eleno the Dark. So no, I can't. There's no artist credit.
We
People need to
hate to
put
see
artist
it.
credits in.
Yeah, please put artist credit into on your work. It's if you're using the art and you don't know the source, just go on ArtStation, search the word that you want. You'll find hundreds of pieces by credited artists. Do that.
All right, we're
Also,
gonna we're gonna we're gonna go with a different one. There's a misspelling, but I'll forgive them. It's called Ritual Merchant. One black, black, black. It's a creature demon citizen. It is a 3/3 creature with menace. Whenever you cast a spell, add a black and lose 1 life. Um, I think merchant has an A in it, but that's okay. Yeah, this reminds me a little bit of. Well, I guess it reminds me of several different cards where you add a black and lose a life at the same time. So it sort of has that black kind of feel to it, and maybe treacherous blessing comes to mind. There's probably a few others. It might be a little bit too strong, however, because it's basically getting a black mana discount for every spell that you've cast. So I don't know. Probably I would tweak that. Maybe make the life loss a little bit stronger or something. Maybe it's only the first spell you cast. I'm not sure, but it's kind of interesting idea that it could be repeatable. And I guess the merchant part sort of falls in there, like being able to I guess sell your soul for mana.
But yeah, I like this, but only because I think that it does crazy stuff, but for a cost that is like pretty reasonable. Like to reasonably storm off with this, you need to be you need to have some sort of mana filtration because you're likely going to like lots of the cantrips are likely going to be in blue and red. Your rituals are probably going to be in red unless you're literally playing in a dark ritual format, in which case you don't need this. And so you need mana filtration. You also need some way to mitigate the life gain or like the life loss or win before it becomes an issue. And you also like since your big like engine is a creature, it's a lot easier for like removal to just be like nah. So yeah, I like all the knobs on this. It feels like a card that can enable big splashy storm-like decks, but without it being like too much of a menace on whatever format. Because usually storm, it's like the issue is that it's not only fast, but the way that it wins fast is on an axis that is hard for decks to normally answer, slash requires kind of specific play patterns of ways to answer it. Which you can definitely do like counter magic and targeted discard, but it's resilient to those to some degree. And I also just I love the type line Demon Citizen. It feels like so
Right.
mundane. Like even demons got to make a living.
I feel like the way black usually does its like big mana stuff is having like mana abilities that produce a large amount of mana in one lump sum and then casting bigger spells. Where this, like, despite having a ritual sort of effect, it's much more like a Goblin Electromancer sort of level than it is like a Dark Ritual or a Urborg and Activate Cabal Coffer sort of ritual. And it's interesting because like I don't think that rebate is super huge at 4 mana. Obviously, it's like a colorful mana symbol where like Goblin Electromancers is just a generic colorless one, but like I don't think that level of cheapening is going to be something that blows the roof off of any sort of situation so much as it is just one that can eventually pile you up enough resources to like sequence a lot of spells in the same turn. It reminds me of what's that cycle of artifacts that always sees play in monocolor decks that reduces monocolor spells by one?
The medallions.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It reminds me of like a little bit more pushed one of those on a body, but at probably a fairer rate.
Yeah, I'm beginning to think maybe white, black, black, black is. I mean, obviously this has got to go in a mono black deck. Like it just would be so hard not to do. Or I mean, again, if there's some kind of a crazy uh, commander deck that has a very easy mana filtration, but uh, yeah, I don't know. It's on a body, so creatures a little bit easier to deal with. I think. Yeah, it's not crazy. I get. Well, I mean, it's crazy, but in a good way.
Yeah.
It's schnasty, as the kids would say.
I don't know what kids you've been talking to, but yeah.
Okay. So wait, is it back around to me now? Oh
Yep.
Lord, it might be. Um, let's look at. Let's look at Pyre Carrier from the MSC file. Um, I think this does something really cool in on multiple levels. So, designed by Juliet, um, and it's an aggressive creature. It's a 2/1. Uh, for a single black mana, you can even sacrifice it to add black mana, but when it dies, it deals damage equal to its power to you. And what I love about this is just the idea of, like, I think cashing in early creatures in the late game is a super cool thing, especially since they're usually hard to use. And I think that a kind of jackal pup esque effect in black feels so natural, but triggering it on dies so that it like makes trading as though it attacked, like they attacked you, or it like essentially hurts you for them trading or chumping it, is like a really cool downside on otherwise a very strong upside aggressive creature, which usually Pyre Carrier, um, like sorry, not usually black doesn't get like aggressive creatures that can also block, but here they still get some of the damage through. And if you want to sack it for value, you got to be making sure that you don't lose the race as a result. I think that it's a really simple card, but one that like turns knobs on both the color pie and on usual balance in a really interesting way.
There's a lot of tension to this card, and I like that as a like very spiky focused card. It's already like good rate on a body just as a 2/1 for one. The drawback does this weird thing though where it kind of disincentivizes you like wanting to buff it. So like if you're playing an elementals deck, you kind of wince when you put a lord out because you're like, oh, that's another point of damage I'm going to be taking to the face when this thing kicks the bucket. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then also the mana ability is like a good mid game ability most likely, where when this becomes outmoded, maybe you can transition to a bigger spell more easily. But like in the absolute late game, it's not very useful because like by that point you're likely to be top decking or be like so glutted on mana that an additional mana isn't going to transition you to anything valuable. So you're likely like at a point with this as a game piece where what you're wanting to do is launder it away into like a 4 or 5 drop the second it becomes outmoded or into like double spelling and it's just interesting as a game piece that like you have to be very like hard nosed with tossing this thing in the garbage at the first sight of like okay it's going to be outmoded here or be like very hard nosed about being like okay I'm never throwing this away because I think that my game plan in the late game is going to be chump attacking with it so there's like it's easy to you have to have your eyes on the horizon in a way when it comes to figuring out whether you're supposed to toss this out.
I think there's two different ways to play with this card, and it gets more and more interesting as I think of it, because as a 2/1, uh, when it dies, it deals damage equal to its power. Okay, fine. The sacrifice ability, you can kind of save that for when you need that extra mana for a combat trick for a different creature or some kind of removal or surprise thing. So it certainly works as a defensive creature, although again it could be tapped, but I guess the whole idea is you could block and then sack it. So, but on the other hand, um, it deals damage to you. So I guess on the other hand, if you can put it out on turn 1, turn 2, maybe it just makes sense to get in for damage as much as you can. That it as the game goes on, I think just becomes less and less relevant. Probably the only thing would be if like there are death triggers. I mean you can basically cast it for free. So if there's a way to like sacrifice it, just as a 1 mana creature, but it's blood pet with an extra power, except with the damage drawback. Um, yeah, I don't know how I would play this in my deck, but I think I think it could either be super aggressive or super defensive.
I do like the
Concept.
idea of
You give it lifelink. Then when it dies, you don't take any damage.
Oh.
Easy.
I do like the idea of using this to kick morbid spells as a use case.
Oh, that's actually a super sweet thing. I wonder how this
Yeah.
actually plays into the mechanics. As for those of you who don't know, the designer of this, Juliet, is making a Jumpstart remix of. I can never keep the sets straight. I don't know if it's Eventide, Shadowmoor, or Lorwyn, but one of the sets in that block. And by Jumpstart remix means like redesigning cards and flavor from that set for like various Jumpstart packs. So yeah, I'll have to ask Juliet where this fits in mechanically with those. Okay. Next up, Mark. What is your next card going to be?
Um, I'm gonna go with a card in MTG.design called Rites of the Earth. Um, it's 1 and a white for sorcery with each player may return a basic land card from their graveyard to the battlefield. It has plane cycling 1 and a white, and it has retrace. Um, I enjoy this as a card in part just because those like keyword soup cards oftentimes are very knobby, and they're very like what you get cumulatively out of them is always very interesting to me. And this one is both like on color pie for white, and then also manages to do a little bit of breaking the symmetry that is inherent to a lot of white's effects. So it's like land ramp that white is allowed to do, but that isn't likely to get your opponent an advantage such that like isn't likely to fall prey to the symmetry that white often has, where it's like, okay, if each player's doing this, it might as well be that nobody's doing this, and so you might as well not have played the card because you can like plane cycle this away, get a planes, and then retrace it to discard that planes and put it onto the battlefield. And your opponent likely doesn't have a basic land in the bin because it's relatively rare for that to be the case. And even if that is the case, then you just throw this out for a planes and then play the planes ordinarily. So I like a lot of the pieces going on here in the context of one another.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like it works in white, and I kind of hate that because white does get this thing of like returning cheap permanents to the battlefield, and that's one of the ways it can do ramp. Um, and like just how the plane cycling leads into the retrace, and the retrace like naturally giving you fuel for the actual ramp. It's a very neat and cool package, and yeah, I feel like lots of times people try to like. There's like this constant call of like white bad in commander because white no get ramp, and like well I think there is some there's some validity to that. Some of it, lots of it is just like people don't play the way people don't like playing the ways that white can actually like even up resources. This and I feel like as a result, people design white ramp cards that just are firmly out of pie and are just there to validate the play patterns they want to get, like to have their cake and eat it too. This is not one of those cards. It's like a well thought out card that like takes elements and mechanics that kind of have been either like forgotten or less utilized by WotC, but are still like in Pi, and puts them together to form a really nice package. And I like what you said about keyword soup cards because uh, they can easily be like uh, I feel like they're either incredibly compelling or incomprehensible with no in between. And this is incredibly compelling because it like uses this familiarity to generate play patterns that I think are different from what these mechanics would even usually make you evaluate them as.
I think my argument against this card is that the card probably synergizes with itself a little bit too much. In other words, it seems really easy to just be able to do everything with it. And it's not like you have to wait for the mana to in order to do it. It's not like a I don't know, a trading post sort of well, maybe it is kind of like a trading post sort of effect, but I mean like the retrace to cast the rites of the earth, it I don't know, it just seems like it's setting itself up too easily. I don't know. Like I guess I feel like maybe magic cards should require a little bit of effort in order to for the engine to get going. But um, playing cycling retrace, it seems like you could just you cast it and get your land back. I don't know.
It kind of reminds me of Eternal Dragon as far as things go. Or not Eternal Dragon. What's the one? Eternalized Dragon?
No, I think you had
Timeless
it.
Dragon.
Yeah. I feel like you had it right the first time, but I cannot tell. I'm gonna look this up on Scryfall now.
They're both riffs on one another, so it's a little bit of a who's on first sort of situation. Where it's just like several things that white is allowed to do in the context of one another. So like Eternal Dragon was like plain cycling and you can return it to your hand. Timeless Dragon is plain cycling and you can eternalize it.
Yeah, so Eternal Dragon is the original. Timeless Dragon was the riff, presumably because of the name of the original.
Yeah. And I do get what you mean about like having a card that plays with itself, especially that plays with itself in a repetitive way, like Retrace, or that plays with itself in such a way that you are doing a thing with it every turn, can get kind of repetitive and a little bit nauseating, especially when it's like jump through these hoops to negate this color's drawback. I'm not sure. I feel like I would need to like play test this in context to figure out whether I feel like it leaves that sort of sour taste in my mouth. Also, circling like a little bit far back, you mentioned that white does have the tools, Caillou. I feel like white has tools to keep things balanced in Commander more so than people give it credit for. It's just most of those tools also have the hidden rules text "You become the arch enemy" on them. You know, when you get and after everybody's been ramping.
That's fair. There's definitely, and hey, today was the day that the new casual play design team was announced. So maybe they'll find a way to, because one thing that's mentioned in the AMA is like, how can you design cards that create fun play experiences, but then also respond to some of the more difficult to interact with play patterns, particularly in Commander. So I think it'll be interesting to see what sort of takes they have there. And yeah, as for like this being a too self-enably, I could easily see like replacing Retrace with something else, so that you can, or like yeah, like some sort of like changing it up where it's like you still can like flash this back or something, but like you need to do the work of like getting the card into your graveyard as you would if you would normally cast it. Um, or like some sort of like off color activation where it's like a land entomb, where so you can like set up different. So if you have like green or black mana, you can pay black, discard this, entomb a land of your choice, and then so that you can set up your next copy. I'm just like spitballing, but I think like the design seed is like compelling enough that you can make variations on it.
I want to make a hot take. I think that it should be Jumpstart instead of Retrace. That's going to be my take.
Right, because Jumpstart is only once, Retrace is forever, forever.
Yep.
Yeah. I buy that. Okay. And Ancestral, what is your next card going to be?
All right. This is from mtg.design. It's Occult Ritual. It's a 1 and a black sorcery. You draw a card and you lose 2 life. If Occult Ritual was cast from a graveyard, create a 5/5 black demon creature token with flying. It has Flashback, so 3 black, tap, and there's no tap, just 3 black and sacrifice a creature. So this reminds me a lot of that Archfiend. Is it Archfiend? Archfiend's Vessel, which was a single black mana lifelink, and then when you cast it, you create a 5/5 demon creature token with flying, and black likes having those really strong flying demons. So definitely the flavor is there. I like that you can sacrifice the sacrifice of creatures part of that flashback cost, which I think is a lot of fun. Actually, the flashback cost might still be a little undercosted just because turn 4, you get a 5/5 black demon creature token. That probably is a little much, but if the flashback costs an extra 2 mana, maybe that would be fine. But I think all in all, it's a pretty straightforward card, and it's not too broken.
What's that 6/6 flying trample for 2 black? I forget. There's like an alt. There's an additional cost on it, but I'm trying to remember. Because I'm just trying to like I want to like compare this to that. So I'm just gonna quickly look that up. It's like a recent printing too. But yeah, I think overall I like the concept of this card where it's like I like the idea of like flashback to represent like you put in some work and then you like the seeds of that pay off. I kind of wish then that like the modes led into each other a little bit more. Like maybe we've always had this classic thing of like what was that card from like Shadows of Innistrad where it's like you discard a card, sacrifice a creature, and you like lose 1 life to like destroy target creature. Sinister Concoction, right?
By the way, the
Sounds right.
demon was Demon of Catastrophes.
Demon of Catastrophes, right. And what was like the drawback on that?
Additional cost to cast, you have to sacrifice a creature.
So this seems probably just tack on another black there, or like tack on 1 more mana, and it seems about kosher on a flashback spell. Because I don't remember Demon of Catastrophes doing anything much in like constructed, though I know it was very powerful and limited. But yeah, I could definitely see like one of these where it's like maybe like the front side is like surveil 2, draw a card, you lose 2 life, and then the flashback is like exile 2 cards from your graveyard, lose 2 life, sacrifice a creature, and then discard a card or something like that where it's like you have that sort of like losing a resource from everywhere, but it naturally provides you one of those resources, so it feels like there's a build up. That's just like a minor thing, and like it doesn't really like this is a fine design on its own, but I think you can definitely add some resonance since the front half is particularly simple.
I am gonna say that I'm a little worried about the rate on this in general. It reminds me of kind of like the Bizarro World offspring of Ecstatic Awakener and Deep Analysis. Deep Analysis in the sense that like the real mode of this card is the back half, obviously. Like the draw a card and lose 2 life is fine, but you're essentially cycling it to get it in the bin in order to be able to have the 5/5 demon. And then you still get the draw a card and lose 2 life element of it when you cast the part where you're making the demon. So you're essentially laundering away whatever creature you sacrifice into a demon and a card um, for 4 mana, which is like pretty pushed rate if you have any sort of incidental token production, and like asking you to produce like a free creature and get Occult Ritual into the bin is not the easiest thing, but it's definitely not the most impossible. So it's essentially like you're getting paid on both ends in the same way that when you like melt down a zombie with Ecstatic Awakener, you're getting paid on both ends because you're turning the zombie into a card and you're turning Ecstatic Awakener into its 4/4 spooky side. Um, so like in conjunction, those things together lead me to think that this is the sort of card that I would be like afraid of in a constructed environment, and also quite probably afraid of in a limited environment if it showed up at any sort of frequency. Which this is rare, so not very likely. But like I think this thing is juiced. I think it's real strong.
I think it's strong, but I'm not sure it's as strong as you guys feel. I definitely think that the flashback should at least be 2 black, so this isn't like the easiest splash ever. But
Mhm.
yeah, I feel like having to like even if you get like a creature that's like good to sacrifice, I feel like the rate on removal these days is such, and like the rate on creatures in general is such that even at like 2 black sacrifice a creature, I don't think that this would be insane to have from graveyard. Though I guess like it being a free card, quote unquote, from your graveyard is something. But I think having to sacrifice a creature makes it less free as like something you can just cast from graveyard slash less just free card
Oh.
advantage. I,
Oh yeah, it was Blood Soaked Altar. That was what I was thinking of. Kind of had a similar sort of thing, uh, but it required You had to pay more mana. Although, actually, if you do the math, is it this? It's almost the same. Blood-Soaked Altar is 6 mana. You tap it, pay 2 life, discard a card, sacrifice a creature. But you can do it repeatedly. That was an uncommon. And this is altogether you pay 6 mana, sacrifice a creature, lose 2 life. I guess the only other difference is you get to draw a card, not discard a card.
Well, you draw 2 cards over the span of it.
Sure, good point. And you lose 2 more life.
Yeah, but then in that case, you're not getting the quote-unquote free value off of this being a card in your graveyard.
I forgot that you lose the life again, so I'm starting to warm up a little bit.
But yeah, they're definitely like, I think that the fact that there's even a disagreement at all indicates that testing is probably necessary to find the right knobs on this card.
Yeah. And like Flashback is a very knobby mechanic, so it's not as though this will necessarily stay crazy strong, if it is even.
Okay, we've had some long discussions today, so we're actually running up on time. So this is going to be our last round for the day. So my last card of the day, I'm going to be throwing it over to, where is this? To Aniri, Spiritcraft Ritualist from the MSC file. Excuse me. Whenever you cast a spirit or arcane spell, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. As long as you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, instant and sorcery spells you control are instant and sorcery, and instant or sorcery cards you own are arcane in addition to their other types. I kind of like this, just using arcane as like a place word almost, where it's just like, yeah, we'll just grant it so that it triggers this first ability. And I like the idea of like using Coven here. Like lots of people have been using mechanics from mid, but I feel like Coven has not gotten a lot of love, so seeing it is something that I like. I also like calling out the batching of Spirit and Arcane in a context that isn't Kamigawa flavored. This really makes me feel like I can definitely see this as like a, maybe even literally in our current standard. I could see this being something like this being printed in Crimson Vow as like kind of a layup for Kamigawa Neon Dynasty style stuff. I definitely think that you could also make a variant on this where like it gives stuff Conspire, because I feel like Conspire is a very culty thing, and I think that it also is an interesting payoff for having a lot of creatures. If you're having like instants or sorceries anyways, give them Conspire, copy them with your board of creatures, go ham. It's obviously a very different design, but that's just like a flavor first type thing that popped into my head when thinking of this. But the current design is completely fine, and I think that it's just like, I don't think it does anything very, very fancy, but it does a lot of little solid things, both in flavor and mechanics. So yes, a shout out to LuckyLooter for this design.
I do wish they found a way to sneak Splice in there somewhere, but that's partially just because I'm a huge junkie for Splice. I like those big, crazy Franken spells.
I don't know. Part of me wants this as a white-blue card. Maybe just that spirits feel less green and more, I mean, obviously they're white, but less green, more blue, and arcane just instants and sorceries. I just don't know that green really cares about them, and it's more of a blue and red thing. So I just feel like this is off one tick in the color pie.
Yeah, I think probably green-white for the Coven flavor. I think you could make it banned.
Yeah.
We know that Modern Spirits played banned primarily for Collected Company, of course, because Collected Company is nutty. But also, I think that would be a cool shout out to, hey, let's make the Spirits Commander also banned, to call out that. But yeah, there are way more blue spirits, so I definitely could see. And since it seems like it's a legendary creature, we know they've been like expanding the colors of those just to give more commander help, so I don't think it would hurt here.
Do you generally like the idea of like commanders that bridge 2 different sets, somewhat introverted sort of mechanics, somewhat insular sort of mechanics? And I could see that happening like a lot. It'd be really cool to make like on a world, roll up a random mechanic and a random other mechanic and see if you can make a commander that bridges those two.
Okay. Mark, what is your last card going to be?
My last card is also in the MSE set file. It is designed by Cajun. It's Kindly Reaper. It's 3 black black for a 5/5 demon with menace. When it enters the battlefield, each player loses 3 life. Then each player with 10 or less life draws 3 cards. And it has Ritual. You may cast this card from your graveyard by sacrificing a non-token creature in addition to paying its other costs. Um, in general, I just like the idea of like uh, this kind of like fateful hour sort of paying off everybody who's losing the most with drawing 3 cards, and also this like group slug of like everybody gets hurt by that ETB ability. Um, I'm somewhat uncertain about Ritual in part because I worry about repeated game state stuff. Where like if you have 2 Ritual cards, then you're just like every turn you swing in with the Ritual card that you have on the field, and then you melt it down and turn it into the other Ritual card that you have in the graveyard, and eventually you're just like turning enters the battlefield abilities into like kind of a just buyback loop is my worry.
Yeah, I think this loops
Um,
too easily with other ritual creatures. I think it's very much the thing that you said with retrace versus jumpstart earlier, where I think this is like you may cast this card from your graveyard by sacrificing a non-token creature in addition to paying its other costs. If it would leave the battlefield, exile it. Feels like a really simple clause to add on the end there.
yeah, or like you may cast a copy of this card from your graveyard is another way to do it. Um, you probably have to exile it from the bin, but then it makes like a token copy of this, so you can't even chain rituals into one another.
Sacrifice a non-token creature you control. Conjure a copy of this card into your hand.
Gah.
Yeah, this is a house. I mean, this is like, this should be nasty Reaper. Give me all the Reapers. I will just, heck, I'll just sacrifice one Reaper to another one. Like, I feel like, and then once you get down to 10 life or less, like draw 3. This is just a house card.
I do enjoy that like you'll be at this point where like your opponent's at 11 and you're like, well, I don't want to hit them in the face because I plan on kindly reapering. Or no, they'll be at 14 and you won't want to kindly reaper because you're like, I want to get the draw and I don't want them to get the draw. Is a very interesting case to be in.
Yeah, I think the sense of just being really defensive, like a 5/5 body is actually a really decent blocker. And then once you get, enough of a board presence, then you just swing in for the kill. I think that if you can get down to just a little less than 10 life, you'll have a, just you'll have enough creatures you could big bodies. So I like for 5 mana, yes, please. Like this, it probably is a little too good.
Yeah, I imagine that like with the nerf to ritual, it probably goes into the bomb but not like broken category. Um, but yeah, ancestral. What is your last card going to be?
Well, I don't know if I'm going to go out on a bang here. So I'm going to go with what's actually kind of an interesting card. I don't know if it's the best card, but certainly interesting. So this is in the MSC file. This is Worshipper of the Substantial. Last card in the file. It's 1 in a white for a creature Merfolk Cleric. 2 in a white, tap, return target artifact or enchantment you control to its owner's hand, then put a +1/+1 counter on Worshipper of the Substantial. So it's interesting that I guess when I think of a ritual, I think of something that you do over and over again. And this certainly fits that criteria. It's it I don't know if this would be abusable or if this is pretty on rate. For 3 mana and tapping a creature, it does seem like you're losing quite a bit of tempo. Certainly if there was some sort of like enters the battlefield enchantment or some kind of crazy artifact, then maybe maybe there's a way to kind of go to town with this, uh, but we have like Celestial Unicorn and several other cards that get +1/+1 counters just from regular life gain, which seems a lot easier to typically do in standard. So the fact that this 2/1 worshiper gets a little bit bigger, I don't think that's terribly critical. So I don't know. It's interesting. I think that white and green have typically had the self bounce, and we typically don't. At least I haven't really seen a whole lot of mechanical gameplay in standard, where I guess I don't really play a lot of Pioneer, but in recent sets, I don't know that we've actually seen a lot of stuff that takes advantage of that.
This feels to me like kind of a bomb common. Not that it's like too powerful, but I think that I would very gladly first pick this as a common. In the sense of like, I feel like the signal's like, hey, I have good ETB artifacts and enchantments. Blink them. And then it also grows. It's a bear on curve. So you can also, like, just curving out and limited is a good thing. It just feels like a really solid common, or like a very exciting common. And I like the idea of like we've seen lots of people like take the idea of ritual as being kind of like this cyclical thing, and so bouncing artifacts and enchantments to represent that feels like a very cute way of showing it off. So yeah, I think like
I
oh, go ahead.
I do worry about instant speed though, because you could like
Mhm.
block with an artifact or enchantment creature, bounce it in order to fog a thing, and then gradually be growing this. It's
Mhm.
also like an onboard trick that's going to happen repeatedly. And if you're doing this at all in like a cube or like some other sort of older format or commander, you can repeatedly O-ring bug with this.
Oh, sure.
Uh,
Yeah, that's interesting. I,
but
I,
more a critique of O-ring though, I suppose.
yeah, sure. How would you feel if it didn't have artifact in there?
I mean, probably about the same because it can still O-ring bug and it's still a value.
Ignoring O-ring.
I mean,
I feel
I don't
like
think the play
if I
patterns
saw
change
this
that
without,
much because you can still bounce a valuable permanent in response to removal. I think that like
yeah,
that's a knob
So if
I'm like
if it was,
yeah,
yeah,
I
okay,
think this make this a sorcery speed. You have the text space and it's free, and like bouncing the artifacts and enchantments doesn't exactly lead to good gameplay. So, but
sure.
otherwise, yeah, I really like the idea of this. Okay, because I was thinking more of this a value engine rather than like a protection piece. Okay, and I guess with that, we'll be wrapping up today's show. Thanks everyone for watching. Thanks for Ancestral and Mark Confidant for coming on the show, especially since this was a bit of a late recording. So thanks you guys for sticking it out with me. Um, as always, if you want to find all of the cards we talked about today, their designer credits, and all of the cards we weren't able to feature today, you can find all of those files and credits in the description, as well as instructions on how you can submit your own cards to potentially be featured in future recaps. But with that, thanks for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow. See ya!